Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Pastor Matt, and I'm here at the building on a Sunday morning. It's nice and quiet, and unfortunately, it's going to stay quiet because we're not having services this morning, and unfortunately, it was nice and too quiet last night. I missed having the sound of kids running around throughout the building on a Saturday night. Nicole and I are both feeling better and just achy. It's weird. My legs ache. My knees ache. My hips ache. I feel like an old man. Anyway, so I thought this morning I would just do a real quick mini message if you care. I'm just kind of going to review a chapter from the book 25 Facts of God. And it's just going to go quick and yeah, hopefully it's something that you find beneficial. Let me pray for us real quick, and then we're going to jump into talking about an attribute of God that we might not think about very often, and that is God is unchanging. So, Father, we thank you for this time. Pray that you would use it as we sit in our homes or wherever we're at today on a kind of dreary Sunday. And again, we just thank you for all the good things that you have given to us. We do pray for continued health for everybody, and especially in this season. And again, we just thank you for Thanksgiving and the opportunity we have to celebrate what all the things we should be grateful for. So again, just thank you for this time, and pray you be glorified in it. Amen. All right, so if I were to ask you what the biggest problem in the world is, there's no shortage of suggestions. People would raise their hand with all kinds of different things. I would say maybe the biggest problem that the world has isn't the thing that isn't a tangible thing, something that is easily noticeable. It's actually the fact that we all have misconceptions of God. That's true for non-believers and believers as well. That our misconceptions of God, our wrong thoughts about God, are actually the biggest problem that we face. And because it affects everything. Every problem that we have is impacted by your view of God. You get a flat tire along the road, I hate to tell you this, but your view of God impacts how you're going to deal with that flat tire along the road, how we handle disappointments. We have what I would call wrong thoughts and small thoughts about God. And this is just kind of a lead up to talking about the fact that God is unchanging. I thought it'd be good to kind of touch on these things real quick. 3 reasons for our wrong thoughts about God. Tell me if you think that this applies to you. We allow experiences and observations to shape our opinions about God. This is the easiest thing to do, isn't it? Second, we create a God that we want to believe in, one we're most comfortable with. And that kind of ties into the third one, is that we don't do well with the unknown. We want things that can be understood. And there's a mysterious part of God, and we don't do very well with that. So because of those 3 things, I think we oftentimes kind of tend to have some wrong thoughts about God. And the second thing is, the second point is the 3 reasons that we have small thoughts about God. So we can have wrong thoughts that are just not accurate. And then we can also have, like, almost called diminished or small thoughts about God. The first one is because we've shrunk God down to something we can conceive. And maybe that resonates with you. Again, we don't do well with something that's transcendent. So we try to understand God. We naturally just try to shrink him down. We want a God of comfort. We only want a God to meet our need for security and peace. And the third reason why we have small thoughts about God is we think we already know enough about God. And as strange as that might sound, I think there's a lot of people who actually in reality kind of fall into that. I think I figured, my brain can only handle so much, so I'm not going to pursue anymore. So we can have wrong thoughts about God. We can have small thoughts about God. One of my favorite quotes is from A.W. Tozer. And he said this: "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." Think about that. Again, a reference going back to the flat tire. Little thing. But what your thoughts are about God might influence how you react to bumps in life, big ones and small ones. what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, the 25 Facts book, because there was a season in my life where things just really weren't going well, and someone told me, in not so many words, just focus on the attributes and the characteristic of God, and that sustains you. And no matter what's going on, it's getting your eyes off of yourself and onto God. So I wanted this morning to talk about the fact that God is unchanging. Okay? I think the other word is immutable. If I got that right, God does not change. He's incapable of change. The verse this morning is probably the shortest verse that we're ever going to tackle on a Sunday morning. It's only, six words long. I, the Lord, do not change. That's Malachi 3:6. I, the Lord, do not change. I want to tell a story to kind of start us off this morning about my Grandpa Johnson. That's my mom's dad. He passed away a long time ago. And when he was a young man growing up in Chicago, he grew up in a part of the north side of Chicago called Andersonville. That was its nickname because there were so many Swedish immigrants there, that the church that, if I understood the story correctly, the church that he was a part of as a young man actually had their Sunday morning sermons in Swedish. And so he grew up going to this church as a little guy, and the sermons were in Swedish. And he spoke English, obviously, but I guess he also knew Swedish. But as a young man, as he grew up, he realized that having the sermons in Swedish made it harder for him to bring his friends to church, because as shocking as it is, not everybody spoke Swedish. So he kind of, as a young man, evidently, kind of helped get the church to do an English service, and they were just be a little bit more progressive. He was an agent for change, you could say. Well, as admirable that is, and obviously it is, about 50 years later, my grandpa walked into the sanctuary at the church he was attending in Michigan, and there was a drum set in the sanctuary. And as much as my grandfather wanted change as a young man, he fought it later on with the drum set. And it just goes to show that we change. We change. What my grandpa was progressive at the one point, but then later on he kind of fought the church changing. And we are people that are always changing. And I think it's important to realize what happens when we have a right thought about God and we recognize that truly God is unchanging. What if God had a public relations agent? Many wish God would change. They argue that it's necessary to keep up with the times. God would be more popular and acceptable to the public if he were only more tolerant and open to new ideas. And unfortunately, you can see a lot of churches actually have changed their doctrine to make it more palatable to the culture. While God has not changed, unfortunately, many in his church have. And they've changed what they believe because it seems to be in such contradiction to what's popular. So many people wish God would change, and they've gone ahead and done him that favor by changing their theology and their practice, which is unfortunately really sad. The second thing is yet another thing God cannot do. He cannot change. His perfection does not allow for it. Even if God wanted to change, he couldn't. I got another Tozer quote for you, A.W. Tozer. God cannot change for the better since he is perfectly holy. He has never been less than holy than he is now, and can never be holier than he is and has always been. Neither can God change for the worse. Any deterioration within the unspeakable holy nature of God is impossible. So think about it. if God is holy, that means he's perfect. And if you're perfect, you can't change. Now, we change, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But God is perfection, which means he's unable. It's impossible for him to change. Because if he did change, that would mean the last version of him wasn't perfect. The third thing, a God that changes is a very, very, very scary thought. So what if God could change? That's a scary question. God never changes, moods or cools off in his affections or loses enthusiasm. Let me start over. God never changes moods or cools off in his affections or loses enthusiasm. His attitude towards sin is now the same as it was when he drove out the sinful man from the eastward garden, and his attitude toward the sinner the same as when he stretched out his hands and cried, "Come unto me, all that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." People might want God to change, but it's a good thing. It's a scary thing if he did. It's a very good thing that he doesn't, because our life is built on a rock, an unchanging rock, and we should find a great level of comfort and solace in that. Why God is unchanging is a big deal. First thing, we all long for comfort and security of a God who cares. But what if a God who cares could also change? Do you want God to be in charge or continually reacting and changing? Think about that. We all long for comfort and security for a God who cares. What if a God who cares could also change? That means he would one day, he could change and not care for you the same way that he cares for us now. Do you want a God to be in charge or one that's reacting to life and situations? We don't want a reactionary God. We want a God who's in charge and unchanging. The second thing is, if God does not change, then his truth also does not change. Isaiah 40, verse 8. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God stands forever. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God stands forever. And then Psalm 119. Your word, O Lord, is eternal. It stands firm in the heavens. Long ago I learned from your statutes, and you established them to last forever. If God does not change, then his truth does not change. And again, if we want God to be a sure thing, he wants him to be a sure rock, a sure foundation for us, then he cannot change. And the third thing, the last point for the morning in our mini message, God's unchanging truth is a solid foundation for our lives. Jesus told a parable of two builders. One built on the rock, his truth, and the other in the sand. When the storms came, one house stood and one house fell. It's a good thing that God is unchanging, because he can't change in his affections for us. His truth does not change, and the foundation that we build our life on in him also cannot change. So, I'm tempted to go on a little bit, but I think I'll just end it up there. No, let me just do this real quick. I just want to add this to it, if I could, this morning. I think Tozer's right, that what we think about God is the most important thing about us. And it's important for us to recognize who he is and his characteristics. And at the beginning of this time, I shared, we have small thoughts about God and we have wrong thoughts about God. And I just want to give you this challenge real quick at the end. 5 things that we need to do real quick. Just bear with me. The first one is this: when it comes to trying to understand God and his characteristics and his attributes. First is to let go of your desire to fully understand a God worthy of awe, silent reverence, and trust. Are you in awe of God? One of the characteristics of God, his attribute, is transcendent. He's different than us, and we need to be able to find that place where we are truly in awe of God. And that only happens when we let go of our desire to fully understand who God is. We're never going to be able to wrap our brains around it, and we need to be able to embrace that. The second thing is recognize that using your own emotions to decide what God is like is a rather foolish way to make a decision as big as that one. Yeah, a lot of people are emotionally driven, and whatever they feel about something is true. And so I just want to give us that challenge. It's true for the world, and it's true to us, even as believers, to a certain extent. We need to recognize that using our emotions to decide what God is like is a foolish way to go. Third thing, you need to be more aware of what you think about God impacts others around you. Other people notice how we react to life. And I remember when my kids got old enough, I was worried about something. I think it was a dentist bill that we had. And all of a sudden I realized, these kids are old enough. They're going to remember how I react to something like that. And so we are a testimony. And our opinions about God, other people are going to notice those things. And so whether it's a dentist bill or your opinion about God, people do notice. And it's important that we recognize that. And maybe that'll help us show some discipline, I think. All right. Stop thinking human-fueled thoughts about God. They're far too small. The God of your brain and the God of your understanding is but a shadow of the reality of God. And that's something that Brennan Manning wrote about. Brennan Manning also wrote this quote: "Reject the dignified, business-like Rotary Club deity we chatter about on Sunday morning and search for a God worthy of awe, silent reverence, total commitment, and wholehearted trust." We really need to focus our center and our thoughts and attention on the God of the Bible and not just the God of our understanding. And the last point this morning: do not assume your experiences with emotion carry over to God as well. We're emotional beings, so we assume God reacts the same way to things that we do. But God is bigger than that, and just because something affects us a certain way, don't assume that it affects God the same way. So, all right. So again, thanks for bearing with us on our kind of spontaneous mini message for the morning. The challenge: do you have wrong thoughts about God? Do you have small thoughts about God? And have you ever thought much about the fact that God is unchanging and that it's a very good thing that he is unchanging, and it's a very scary thought that he could possibly change. And so it's a good thing that his perfection does not allow him to change. So, all right. So thanks so much for joining us this morning. Take care. God bless. Again, thanks for wishing Nicole and I well. And someone even dropped off soup, which was awesome. So, all right. Take care. God bless. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.